This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and me.
Hello, I'm John Grom, and welcome to the 30th Right and Left Discussion Forum. The purpose of our discussion forum is to show that rational people can disagree without being disagreeable. We believe that our free, self-governed society requires an open exchange of ideas that can only happen when we respect each other's opinions and viewpoints. Our discussion topic today is one that's been getting a growing amount of attention in education circles. Research by Angela Duckworth from, I have to work at this. This is the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, also known as Penn. She's done a lot of research indicating that the traits of grit and self-control are more reliable indicators of success in life than either income of family, talent, individual test scores, and other measures. The grit is a tendency to sustain interest and effort toward a long-term goal. Self-control is described as the voluntary regulation of behavior, emotional and attentional impulses, and in the presence of temptations or diversions, which also leads to almost immediate regret. But self-control and the ability to sustain interest and effort in a long-term goal. Our panel today will bring a little bit of light onto this topic. Beginning on my left is Patty Haskins, retired math teacher and current Wadsworth City Councilor. On her left is Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services and a member of the Medina County Republican Central Committee. On his left is Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, retired senior research chemist, and I recently found out the holder of 7 U.S. patents. On his left is Tim Burns, retired teacher and school principal and current manager of adult services at the Twinsburg Library. Patty, I'm really anxious to hear what you have to say on this topic. The significant research that I mentioned a moment ago points to grit or persistence, hard work, and the ability to rise above failure as more important than just about any other measure of or predictor of success. And that the idea is that it should be taught in our schools. There are other people that regard grit and self-control as building false hopes in some students and promotion of a narrow right-wing political agenda. And I'm really anxious to find out what your thoughts are.
First of all, you said it is a predictor of success. I think we have to define what we mean by a predictor of success, and that is certainly not the only thing that labels success. I mean, whether you get a job or not, I mean, there are studies that show the better looking you are, increases your chance of getting a job. If you're a male and you have hair or are bald, that can make a difference whether you get a job. So I guess I'd question, first of all, what they're talking about as far as success. As far as hard work, to say that that is the overall proponent for success in education, I think is incorrect. There are many factors which label success. Now, certainly, grit or hard work, memorization skills, this type of thing are in early grades, I think, measures of success. You know, when you look at the elementary curriculum, in many cases, it is a number of core facts that students are supposed to do or learn. For example, in mathematics, you have your multiplication tables or your, the little cards, the flashcards that you go through. And a lot of schoolwork at that level is a matter of hard work, and those students that put in more effort and try harder are going to do better. As you go along on grade level, though, analyzing, creativity, intuition, these are skills which also come into play. And along with that, the basic IQ of the student that's that isn't involved in the class. There are limitations, I think, in some cases as to what you can learn. I cannot tell you how many times I would hear from someone, I'm not good in math. Now that always kind of bothers me because it's almost as if it is acceptable to say I'm not good in math. No one would proudly say I'm not good at reading. That would be inexcusable, but to say I'm not good at math is okay. But when you get to the higher level of mathematics, it's not necessarily a matter of hard work. There is a background of hard work that leads to it, but you have to have, first of all, that innate ability to look forward and to problem solve. And you have to have the creativity that is required for that. I actually went to a math conference when I first started teaching, Ohio Council of Teachers of Mathematics, and Dr. Kenneth Cummings, who was at the time, this was many years ago, was the dean of the math department at Kent State University. And he said, in high school you will learn how to do things, and when you get to college we will teach you why you do certain things, so that you would expand that creativity. I think though with the expansion of our coursework, the AP courses and so forth that we have at the high school, that basic ability, that IQ level, that creativity, I think that's also very important. It's also, and I've seen this many, many times, it makes a big difference the background of the child. If the child is from a family where education is important, where it is encouraged, where the family reads often, when they are very up to date on current affairs, the results, the success of that student tend to be much greater because that kid doesn't have to work as hard. The child that comes from the family where there are problems, no matter what they may be, poverty, they may be divorce, there may be violence in the home, there may be drug use, all of these things, that makes it more difficult for that child. And to say that that child just needs to work a little harder, well, yes, they do, but there are limitations with this. I know that one of the comparisons in the study that I read was the Scripps-Howard spelling bee, which is, and the students that do well in that study, well, my only concern there is, first of all, that is they're studying spelling to the exclusion of every other thing. And I'm not sure in the education process of a child that we want to say, here's the one thing you're going to study and that's going to be it and you're going to be great with it. And I'm not so sure what success that would be. But there are things that unless you have a unique talent, you're not going to be. I'd love to be a football player, but I'll tell you right now, I could try as hard as I'd like, and I'm never going to make it. And we do have limitations, and we have to work within those limitations. Another thing that affects it is the maturity of the student. I used to always talk to, when I talk to parents, explain there's your social maturity, but there's also an academic maturity. I would have kids in high school that academically were not mature enough to handle the material, but you knew they had innate ability, and when they went to college, when that maturity caught up with their ability, then they were able to focus and work and apply the knowledge that they had, and they ended up being successful.
When you're talking about students coming from difficult backgrounds where they have a lot more to cope with
Yes.
Than others, though, wouldn't you agree that teaching that child how to recover from failure, how to persist, how to avoid being tempted by some kind of a short-term gratification, if you could teach them those virtues, wouldn't they do better?
Oh, agreed. They're going to improve. But I don't think that that's the only thing that determines their success, which is what Ms. Duckworth is implying, that is the major thing that they have to do. And actually, she goes so far as to say it doesn't make any difference, the poverty and the so forth. So it's a little difficult.
Bryan, I've heard you talk on this in a little different slant before.
Is it okay to take it in a little different slant?
I'm anxious to hear what you have to say.
I don't disagree with everything, with anything that Patty said. I agree 100%. I especially agree with the fact that families are probably the most important indicator as to the success of a student. I read some studies, some of the social commentators out there. You know, we had the greatest generation. We've had baby boomers, Generation X. Now they're considering calling this particular generation the teacup generation.
Oh, really?
Because they're so fragile that every time that there's a problem in their life, if their helicopter parent isn't there to correct it, they just go down in flames. They cited any number of examples. They took a survey of college professors as to how many times they've been called by the parent of a student. This is college.
That shouldn't happen.
It shouldn't happen. We've talked a little bit about this. You know, I was raised in a household where if you came home and the teacher sent home a note that said you were somehow misbehaving or not doing well, there was never a question as to, well, does that teacher like you? Or there's a personality conflict, you know, all these things. The teacher was always right. The adult was always right. And this goes to grit. Unfortunately, I think we're crippling a generation of kids that think that they're going to graduate from college and automatically become the CEO of a company because they made it through college with the help of their mom, who did most of their papers, with the help of their dad, who called up the professor because, you know, Jimmy doesn't test well. You know, this type of behavior and this type of enabling is detrimental to anyone's ability to pick themselves up. I like to look at sports, and I brought some statistics for Hank Aaron. I believe Hank Aaron probably holds the home run. I take out Barry Bonds because of the drug stuff. Over 23 years, Hank Aaron went to the plate 13,941 times.
And failed to get a hit how many times?
He struck out 1,383 times. He had 755 home runs. His batting average was somewhere in the 374 range. That's grit. Mm-hmm. You know, there were years where he just didn't do well, and his motto was, you just keep swinging. And that's the problem, I think, with a lot of the kids today is once they meet with a little bit of resistance, a little bit of failure, they pack it in. They quit. Mm-hmm. And we can talk about, you know, being raised in different families and having different parenting styles, but I think there's some very common core behavior and child rearing principles that everyone can initiate with their kids. Rules, boundaries, limitations, and consequences. When your son or daughter has a problem and they're not doing well in school, you know, our kids went through the Wadsworth City schools. I'm a outspoken proponent of the school system. We've never felt as though, and trust me, our kids. Yeah. Or a variety of a variety of issues with them, but whenever we had a problem, we could always sit down and talk with those teachers and come up with a solution. Yeah. So, you know, my term as far as grit is giving that opportunity to that kid. Don't worry so much about failure. You're going to fail. I mean, I don't think has anybody here batting 1,000? Has anybody here not been, the first job you went to, you got hired and you made $150,000 a year? I think that's the problem with our kids today is that we have created this cocoon around them, and every little thing that would give them the opportunity to experience some grit, to pick themselves up, we somehow think that we can mediate that, you know? So that's the problem I have. I agree with Patty, and I'm sure I'll agree with most everyone here, but we have to be able to say to our kids, you're going to fail sometimes. Mm-hmm. Failure's not bad. You don't want to make it a habit, and you want to make sure you understand why you're failing.
But how you respond to
that.
The important
thing.
thing.
And I've got a variety of little stories. Some of my heroes, George Washington, lost his father when he was 11, got smallpox when he was 14, wasn't able to go off to finishing school, never had a college education, was basically apprenticed out to this gentleman that, you know, the wealthy gentleman that he became a surveyor for. That's grit. Mm-hmm. You know, that's picking yourself up by your bootstraps. I'm really wondering sometimes if our kids have that ability, you know? So I'll stop for now.
Isn't it important to know when to quit, though? Because there are some battles that are losing battles.
Well, I look at Colonel Sanders. Over 1,000 times he submitted his recipe for that Kentucky Fried Chicken to restaurants. Thomas Edison 1,000 times. You know, okay, I understand there is a point where you decide, I'm not going to do this. But, you know, some of the greatest inventions, you know, Bill Gates and Paul Allen, their first foray into software was, I think it was called Trafo Data. They couldn't even get it to work in their big presentation. It was an abject failure. They could have packed it in and said, oh, let's do something else. Steve Jobs, all these great people that exhibit grit. They're not pie in the sky. It's not hopeless. It's not pipe dreams. It's sticking and staying with, you know, staying with something and seeing it through. I think we've really failed in these particular areas. So,
you know, quite often when we deny our children the opportunity to fail, we're denying them that opportunity to reach inside and find out that inner person that can rise above that. Do you agree with that, Ron?
I would. I'm glad to see a couple of educators here today, though, because I don't have, other than the average parent, that much contact with the school systems these days. But I'm reading in this, some of this, the old nature versus nurture kind of thing here, too. Because I happen to be in a choral group called Cantati Singers, a little plug here, giving a concert April the 13th down in the Presbyterian Church that's on the campus of Worcester College. And we're singing a Mozart piece. And Mozart is an example of a guy who, by the age of 5, he had music published. He had written a symphony. Now, there's some genetics. His father, Leopold, was a musician. And there's push by the parent. His father took him all over Europe in the attempt to make some money off of him. But Mozart had it. He was born with it. He had innate talent. One of my sons and I had this conversation on occasion. He said, well, Mozart just worked hard. You know, he was able to get it. We all have this spark within us. We all have some of that spark within us, but we don't have what Mozart had in that particular field. And that you might probably find that with the Beethovens and the Babe Ruths and whatnot. They had the physical abilities, they had the mental abilities, and they had that divine spark, that talent. Mozart worked hard. My kids work hard. I just came back from California, lovely weather, visiting my 2-week-old grandson. I also visited my 16-year-old granddaughter and my 10-year-old grandson, both of whom are still in the school system, both of whom work very hard. My 16-year-old particularly is a very fine student and always has been. She spends a lot of time on her homework. 10-year-old, a little bit situation, he's a very happy boy, happy young fellow. He's doing well in school. And in thinking about my own history, working hard, I was a pretty good speller in elementary school. When I was in 6th grade, I won a school-wide, 8 grades in the school. I won a school-wide spelling contest. When I learned about words and root origins, I just sit down and read pages of the dictionary just for fun. Mm-hmm. So, and I still have a good vocabulary. I do crossword puzzles.
Now that takes grit.
So
to be amused with the dictionary.
Well, you know, it was fun. And I don't know what to tell you.
Not something that I would do, but I would think that works. I think that's, that shows grit.
But I don't know. I don't know about teaching it in the school system. You have to encourage it. A child's self-worth is formed in his early years. And here's the family background. If the child isn't recognized to realize his self-worth, that he has the ability to dig and work out and plumb his depths, he's going to have a really hard time of it.
Yeah. Tim, let me put it to you this way. Excuse me. The idea of teaching grit does not seem to me to be a groundbreaking idea. When I was in school, I remember being taught how to persist. The nuns called it stick-to-itiveness. But the whole idea of putting forth effort, overcoming failure, persisting to the end, setting a long-term goal and doing everything you can, that seemed like normal stuff to me when I was a kid. To you and your educational background, isn't that sort of what you expect a teacher to instruct?
Well, I think there's a term that students use nowadays that would cover like what we are talking about with the importance of grit and self-control, and that very scientific term is duh. I mean, it's going to shock a lot of teachers that they thought they were doing that. They thought that they were promoting self-control. They were promoting persistence, that you will succeed. I think if we look at just raising our own children, I have 4 children, and I used to kid that I had one of each because all my kids were different, but they were all raised in exactly the same home.
Sure.
We just came across a videotape from 1983, and all 4 kids were involved. It was a birthday party, and we were playing this newscaster game, and I was shocked at how much my 4 children were all engaged in this activity. But that's what we did. There was an engagement. But in 1983, there were no cell phones. There was Pac-Man as a game, but my kids didn't play that, you know. I think the distractions of today are so monumental that teachers, it's harder to teach today to children, partly because of helicopter parents. You know, parents are not going to sit for their child coming home crying about school at any grade. And they're going to come and say, you know, you have to do something. But I think teachers have been doing this consistently. I think a lot of this has come up with Malcolm Gladwell's book, you know, about the 10,000 hours of practice. And I believe that. I mean, like spelling, put 10,000 what else aren't you doing? You can't do 10,000 hours of everything. And what is success? If I had gone through Algebra 2 in high school, I would have considered myself a success, you know? I didn't see that I was going to do it, but I do know that the line of great success is better math skills. I mean, that's almost so how do you do that, you know? And persistence is but it's like losing weight. If you're in a diet and you're not losing weight, you're going to cheat. I mean, if you're not losing the weight that you think, you know, it just you have to have success. So I was thinking, what is it that we need to do in how to teach this? By the way, nobody has come up with how to teach this. I mean, there's a private school that has kind of like the Marines, you know, they're doing very well, but if you don't make it, you're out. So that's pretty easy. If we got rid of all the students who weren't successful. But I think what is needed is a coach. I think that's the key. You're practicing, you're showing. The coach hones that. The coach knows how to step in and say, all right, you know, you have to do farther, more, you know, like a trainer. And then they get to that point, they just do that one more thing, and then they praise. Well, you can't do that very easily with 30 kids. No. You can sort of do it, but it's going to take a monumental effort. You know, my son teaches special ed, and before he taught special ed, he taught in the Oriana House as a 23-year-old, teaching felons, some in their 50s, 40s, teaching them the GED skills. And they tried to teach this kind of curriculum along with it, making better decisions, just thinking before you act. And he was 23 years old, and I said, how in the world? And he says, Dad, you can just look at them and you know they're going to make the wrong decision. And he was 23 years old, but it was a lifetime of poverty, a lifetime of maybe abuse or whatever. You know, I came across a good term, one last thing, slack.
Yes.
Instead of grit, might be a greater, people who have more resources of, say, like more emotional support perhaps, they can slack off a little bit and they can pick it up later. But you take somebody maybe in extreme poverty, they haven't got any slack. They better go forward the whole time because there's no one going to be there to support them at home or something like that or be able to pick them up. And I knew this from the 60s when my friends in college were smoking marijuana and having a great time, not doing a thing, going to a commune. And then I said, whatever happened to old Bill, you know, from the commune? Oh, he's a stockbroker now at Merrill Lynch. What?
Yeah.
How can that be? Well, he had slack.
Yeah. One of the problems with slack, though, when you're talking about people having all the resources that they need, they don't have to worry. A kid that came from a well-to-do family with very good parenting and all of that comes to school without being hungry. Comes to school without having health issues and abscessed teeth and so forth. They've got it all over the kid from poverty. Where they don't have it all over the kid from poverty is that they've never failed. and grades were easy to get. And they graduate from school and they've never failed. They're terrified of failure. They take a low-risk, easy route type of career. And I can remember talking to executives that would not hire A students. They never learned to recover from failure. They would rather have the BC students because they know how to work. They know how to recover from failure and all. But no, I mean, I think back to some of my friends in high school that never took a book home. They didn't need to.
Yeah.
They just got A's, and I'm sure they're all working at the post office now.
That happens actually in a lot of cases. There have been some studies on that. But you know, you mentioned earlier, I don't think this is anything new. Education, I found, because I taught a long time, is cyclical. They just, after 20 years, they rename it. You know, it used to be, you know, grit says you learn facts, you memorize, you do this. 15 years ago, they came up, I remember I went to a class called Project Discovery. You don't teach facts, you let the kids self-learn. You give them problem and they problem solve. Okay, now that's run its course, now we're back to let's do road. When in fact, what it requires is a good mesh of both skills.
In defense of Angela Duckworth, she does not know what her research really means. She's got more questions than she has answers. What she did was to put together a 12-question test, an assessment test, and gave to the participants in the National Spelling Bee, and also gave it to West Point cadets. And based on that test, tried to measure grit, and by measuring grit, predict who would survive to the final round of the spelling bee, or who was going to make it through the first summer of training. And the results were the people that scored the grittiest on the test were the ones that were there over the long haul. But anyway, thank you very much. This was another good discussion. And I would like to leave everybody with this quote from Jesse Owens. His name was not Jesse, by the way. It was James Cleveland Owens, I believe. Jesse said, we all have dreams, but in order to make dreams come into reality, it takes an awful lot of determination, dedication, self-discipline, and effort. That's from a champion. Thank you very much.